Ohayou gozaimasu. Welcome to our Father's Day family service. Before we begin, congratulations to all of our fathers and uncles and grandfathers here. And maybe we can all start with a 1-minute meditation. Will everyone please rise for Gatha, Shinshu Shuka on page 111. Now we'll have sutra chanting, Shoshinge on page 20. You can all be seated. Okay, will everyone please gasho before sutra chanting?
無有来あむむなしもおどさりに在籍在用部署と現象のに国の人間自然幕本流無常主張感超ける大空勢おこし類し生じ十千両所本実法不本無用無変更無限無界公園の少女間に知恵を不断なし無償法上日学校小人生一切無常無法所本願病後症状後自身心病管理上等学長大涅槃一子変動願成就老来勝利公主世唯世皆本願会合助学寺運上会法神如来如実論もう一年期愛心不願本の特命藩本性逆法再永流明修死入会一味摂取信仰上昇後意の水波無明暗本来心臓死運無上空心地心近天意妙に幸福無資源用無暗薬心健教大狂気即応調整合悪臭一切全幕本風林門心如来無勢観運言東大小霊者税人名文化理系理学本願原部社権教満学修上信行十人人に南中市南部大市インド祭典市論芸中華自治力士構想現代諸公正勝利妙如来本税大き釈迦如来両達成一種公明南天地空流中大地主等世親王在派無権先世大乗無情法召喚議事小安楽賢治南行六六信行理行指導楽億年未学本願自年即人入品上唯の上昇如来法法大義無世音天金菩薩上論世異名無下公如来永寿波羅天心地高専法上大聖観こういう本願美栄光二度訓上昇立心金融空毒大法会金学如来永寿主国士連芸造世界即昇進妙法昇進 You honoring things you shall be on the on지 원남교 갱시 교보란 쇼보사라이 산서유시 규적교 원쇼생명이 아니고 갱기보사람 주게 고도인가 갱세가 오갱의 고유다리기 쇼조시 신진 안생몽드 신진호 쇼지 소근해만 비시그려 보여도 쇼르슈저 가이크게 도자케 쇼도난쇼 유인여저도 가스뉴 만생지리 액몬슈 백만토크고 간생쇼 삼불산신계영공 소마호메도히 이쇼소와크지그데이 시안묘 가이쇼묘하 벤도 덕묘 의쇼이 오아이도 상요경과들 고명요도 개인의 다이기용감달지다이 요자쇼들 공모신 고기 지낸소고 요이다이토 양상인 소득쇼고쇼지노라구 겐칭호 다이지나이토 헨기양여 다이사이 생노슈싱 한센징 오케미노쇼렌유 고그즈 아크니 쇼그 가야쿠사이기 세슈즈 온노쇼겐 스리프겐 다이기 문겐조쇼가 온지겐 크뇨 엠민생만 공드니 신슈교쇼 오렌슈 생자동남그라세 엔라이쇼기 인텐게 객시기저이쇼시 서근유 야크조그리 아크비치 신인이노뉴 그교라이지슈시고 도사이문행 고그저그와규 도서그지슈그도신 유이카신시 감사합니다. 오소그
Okay, please stand if you're able for Vandana Ti-Sarana on page 17, led by Reverend Steve, and stay standing for the three treasures on page 18.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa buddham saranam gacchami dhammam saranam gacchami sangham saranam gacchami. Difficult is it to receive life in human form. Now we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the Buddha Dharma. Now we hear it. If we do not receive awakening in the present life, then in what life can we hope to receive it? Let us reverently take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. I take refuge in the Buddha. May we, together as one, begin on the great path of enlightenment, holding in our hearts the supreme aspiration. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we, together as one, enter the storehouse of the Dharma and attain true wisdom as deep as the oceans. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we, together as one, united in harmony, strive to live for the enlightenment of all beings. The incomparable, deep, and profound Dharma is difficult to encounter even through countless ages of kalpas. Now we are privileged to hear and receive it. Let us endeavor to thoroughly understand the true meaning of the Buddha Dharma. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Please be seated.
Rinban will now come to introduce our Father's Day speaker.
Good morning. Today's guest speaker is our president, Ken Saiki, and he will talk about his father. And I've read about his mother. He gave me two books about her mother, but I've never heard about his father. So I'm looking forward to listening to his Father's Day talk. about his father. よろしくお願いいたします。
Okay, so we're going to give you a wave and a welcome.
Oh. Reach out. Thank you, Rinban and Amy. 父の日おめでとうございます。Happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. This morning, I'd like to talk a little about my father, Kyoto Saiki, who was born in Hiroshima-ken in Japan. Hiroshima-ken, Takata-gun, Shiraki-machi, Shiamura. He was the 10th of 11 children, and he would have been 118 years if he were still with us today. In fact, yesterday was his birthday. He was born on June 20, 1908. That's Meiji 41年. So Meiji 41, so he was a Meiji man. I'd like to tell you today about how he got to Hawaii. You're probably familiar with the story of the Kanyaku Imi, the 30,000 Japanese immigrants who came here on a government contract in the late 1880s to work on sugar plantations. Another 56,000 came in the 1890s on private contracts with the plantations. And well, that's how my mother's family and parents got to Hawaii from Hiroshima and settled on the Big Island once their contract was over. By the 1900s, the early 1900s, Hawaii was no longer a kingdom, but a territory of the US. So any contracts of servitude like these immigrants had were no longer valid as they violated US labor laws. And many workers left the plantations. And there was a surge in migration from Hawaii to California in search of higher wages, which caused problems with the locals there who were competing for the same jobs. And as a result, there was anti-Japanese sentiment and discriminatory treatment. So that led to the Gentleman's Agreement in 1908, in which President Theodore Roosevelt, promised fairer treatment of Japanese in California, including desegregation of schools, if Japan agreed to restrict issuing new labor passports. Now, you have to remember that the US was treading lightly at this time because at that time, in the early 1900s, Japan was an emerging power. In fact, they had won the Sino-Japanese War. They had beaten the Russians in 1905, the Russo-Japanese War. And so they actually treated Japan as almost an equal. And by 1920s, Japan had the third largest navy in the world. And so, they were a power to contend with. And so President Roosevelt actually did accede to the demands that Japan had. While the attempts to reduce discrimination did help lessen the immediate tensions along the Pacific coast, much of the anti-Japanese sentiment that existed in California would remain and spark once again in World War II when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt formed the Japanese internment camps. Fortunately, just before the agreement, the gentleman's agreement was formalized, my grandfather in Hiroshima had sent his eldest son, Zenichi, to Hawaii. At that time, he was the only son old enough to get a labor passport, and he became the key to my father eventually getting to Hawaii. I'll get into that. Although no more new labor passports were being issued, there was a loophole in the gentleman's agreement that allowed those already in Hawaii to bring in their parents, spouse, and children. Siblings, however, weren't included. And of course, my father was a sibling of Zenichi. And so, using the loophole, Zenichi sent for his mother. As soon as she established residency in Hawaii, she summoned 3 of her youngest children, which included my father and his brother, next brother up, and a sister, to Hawaii. Once the children were here, she left them in the care of Zenichi and his wife and booked passage back to Japan. Mission accomplished. During this so-called Yobiyose period, Yobiyose is to summon, 1908 to 1924, some 60,000 Japanese were able to immigrate. These included the Shoshinge, the picture brides that everybody knows about. And so my father was able to make it here despite the restrictions and made it just before the Immigration Act of 1924. Now that's the one that was known as the Asian Exclusion Act of 1924 because it closed the loophole and cut off any further immigration of Japanese and other Asians as well. All previous to that, the Chinese they had a Chinese Exclusion Act that prevented more Chinese from coming, they were more of a threat in California because there were so many of them and they came earlier. But what was particularly onerous about the Immigration Act of 1924 was while it excluded all Asians, it set higher immigration quotas for Northern and Western Europeans and lower quotas for Southern and Eastern Europeans. So that's your history lesson for today. I remember my dad telling us about his days growing up in Kaka'ako, walking to Pohukaina School from the Alapai Street tenement that they lived in. And he mentioned once about running back home during his first time he saw a black person. So he was so scared, he ran back home. And he also told us about how he tried to get his brother, Zenichi's wife, to sew him underwear like other kids in the school, because I guess being an immigrant, he must have had fundoshi or maybe nothing, I don't know. And he told us about on his birthday, he would get a short strip of paper caps. I don't know if you know, we used to call them paper shot. There was a red paper, and this is in a roll, and it had little spots of gunpowder, and they were usually meant to put in the pistol that you could cock back, and each time you shot the hammer would hit and go pop, and smoke come out. But so he would get just a short strip on his birthday, and of course they didn't have the kind of money to buy a real cap gun, so my dad would have to hit it with a rock, and of course it popped, and then the smoke came out, and so that was his birthday present. That was the state of their financial affairs. He attended Pohukaina School until the 5th grade, and then became an apprentice at the Watanabe Tuck Shop. That was an auto upholstery shop on Cook Street, around the corner from his tenement. He got married at age 23 in an arranged marriage with my Nisei mother when she was 16. He was eventually able to purchase the auto top shop from the owner, and actually wanted a bigger place for expansion. Business must have been good, since I remember seeing a photo album of a trip they took together. My father and mother took together to Manchuria in the late 1930s. And I was surprised because I didn't think, I always heard about depression and nobody having money and, not people not being able to do things, but, for them to take a ship to Manchuria and tour Manchuria in the late 30s. And that was, surprising to me. And my father opened a new, larger location on South King Street between Pensacola and Picoy Street. I think it was, 1940. You know, Dennis, what the year was built? But everybody thought it was foolish for him to take such a big risk, as war with Japan was inevitable. But as luck would have it, the war brought thousands of military personnel to Hawaii, along with their hundreds of staff cars, which would all need seat covers eventually, every so often. On top of that, no new cars were being built because all the steel was being used for war purposes, and no cars were manufactured for civilians during the war. And so the cloth seat covers were wearing out. Business was really booming, with a steady stream of cars needing new upholstery. I remember as a young kid riding on his back, oppa. We call Hiroshima Ben is oppa. I guess in Japanese, standard Japanese is obu, but oppa. And he used to say, one more cars, because this was at night when he was moving the cars from outside in the parking, on the street parking, into the shop for the next morning's seat covers. One of his biggest problems was getting decent tools to do the job, since they weren't readily available for purchase by civilians. But at the same time, enlisted soldiers and sailors had a hard time getting booze, or getting decent bottles of whiskey and rum and stuff. And so he developed a great barter system, which he traded tool sets. He traded the booze for tool sets, which just happened to be lying around back at the base. So that's how he got his tools. Very shrewd. A few years after the war ended, my dad, at 40 years of age, was diagnosed with a heart condition, and his doctor suggested he stop working immediately and think about just enjoying life, traveling. And so he sold his business, booked the mainland trip with Uchar Travel Agency. The building is still there on Hotel Street, and their slogan was, "See the world before you leave it." And so the following year, he booked a round-the-world trip with Uchar, and he'd go on extended trips, just about every year, I think, for the next 45 years. So he, of course, outlived his doctor. He told him that he better quit work. Meanwhile, Naga hide and plastic seat covers were invented, and the auto upholstery business pretty much became obsolete. And he realized he got out just in time. So another, either luck or shrewd businessman, but he made it just in time. So he made some wise real estate and other investment decisions, including buying stock in unknown companies, such as Sony and like that. Much of the last half of his life was spent supporting community organizations, especially those that helped preserve Japanese culture and built relationships, working toward better relationships between the U.S. and Japan. And he even received an imperial decoration for his efforts. Well, he was alive. I wasn't always the oyako, filial son that I could have been. And so, after I retired, I joined many. In fact, I think I joined all the organizations he belonged to try to carry on the kind of work that he was doing. I admired him and what he did, and so he was a role model for me. We never really carried long conversations, because he was a Meiji man, and so Meiji men didn't say much. They just expected you to know what they wanted. While he was somehow affiliated with Higashi Honganji Betsuin, I remember only one occasion being at the temple with him. This was when the Betsuin was located on the other side of Vineyard Boulevard on Banyan Street. And now that I think about it, it must have been to make arrangements for his brother Zenichi's funeral service. So while we were there, he told my brother Dennis and me to play in the parking lot while he was meeting with the minister. And we were elementary school kids that time. And so we were playing around. And I remember finding coins at the entrance of the Hondo. And, we were so amazed that we could find money, just lying around. And so we proudly showed the stash to my father when he was done. And he made us put the coins back, as we found out that it was actually meant for the Osai-sen offering box that was there. I wonder if this is the same Osai-sen offering box from 75 years ago. Wow, that was 75 years ago. Amazing. Because of my Japanese immigrant father, hundreds, well, actually thousands of cars extended their lives with new seat covers, including those, ironically, for the Pacific War effort against Japan. And his community work strengthened ties between peoples and nations. Because of him, my mother was able to go back to night school to get her high school diploma equivalency once the children were old enough, and eventually get her doctorate in education, and went on to develop curricula for the Department of Education for the state schools. Because of him, his 4 children were able to lead productive lives in contributing to Hawaii's and America's growth through education, public service, and business, and succeeding generations are doing their share as well today. So thank you, Dad, for making your way to these shores, despite all the obstacles put out to try and prevent you from getting here. Each one of us here today probably has a similar or even more compelling story to tell about parent struggles to survive. So on this Father's Day, let's all do our best to spread the aloha spirit, the teachings of the Dharma, and remain vigilant to keep xenophobia, ignorance, and prejudice from ruling this land. Happy Father's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'm wondering what your daughter is going to say about you. We now have some announcements for what's coming up in the next few weeks. On Monday, on the 22nd, tomorrow at 6 o'clock, we'll have Bon dance practice. That will be here in person, and we'll also have it on the following Monday on the 29th. And let's not forget, Bon Dance is Friday and Saturday, July 11 and 12, 10 and 11. Okay. On Tuesday at 3 o'clock, we'll have ukulele band practice in person and Zoom. And that evening at 5:30, we'll have dinner and movie night in the conference room. The movie is 24 Eyes, a 1954 film, Japanese film. On the 27th, Saturday, there will be no Shoshinge class for beginners that day. So no class for that Saturday. On Sunday, next Sunday at 10 o'clock, we'll have Shinran Chonin Memorial Service, both in person and YouTube. And on Monday, again, Bon Dance practice in person. On the 5th Sunday at 10 o'clock, Shotsuki Memorial Service, both in person and YouTube. And the Dharma message will be by Rimban Inoue. And on Sunday at 11:30, the photography club will be meeting in the conference room. Are there any other announcements? Okay. We'll now end our service today by singing the Gata Ondokusan on page 112 in our service books. So please rise if you're able. That concludes our service for today, and please join us for little Father's Day refreshments over at the Tiny Hall. Thank you.